Bryan Koulouris. I'm a national organizer for Socialist Alternative. And I think this discussion, what next for the movement behind Bernie, in some ways is the most important and the most pertinent to have at this moment for the left. We have a situation where, as a continuation of movements, as another expression of the fight back against capitalist crisis, we have millions of people around the country voting for someone who calls themselves a socialist, voting for someone who energetically puts forward a political revolution against the billionaire class, who calls for a $15 an hour minimum wage, for guaranteed free health care at all, for taxing the billionaires, and for a political revolution. Now, of course, we see as well that this movement has come up against the leadership of the Democratic Party, most notably and most recently with the situation in Nevada. I think that these contradictions are what we need to discuss, but also we need to think about what we can propose to the Bernie supporters to keep them engaged and active in a way that can win victories for working class people, victories against oppression, and continue the discussion about socialist ideas in a way that can inspire, motivate, educate, and keep people active. So in that context, in this moment right now, where people are thinking about what to do next in terms of the Democratic National Convention, what to do next in terms of independent politics, what to do next in terms of fighting the leadership of the Democratic Party, I think in this moment right now is a crucial task to formulate the best strategies, the best slogans, to engage with Bernie supporters, to raise their consciousness, and to get them more active in the struggle for working class politics and for social movements. So I will stop there with my introductions. And we have a panel here. There's a bit of the changes to panel in your program, and I'll introduce the speakers as they come up. Winnie Wong, shockingly, is out organizing alongside a nurses union. Obviously, we think that's terrible here at Left Forum, and she should be here instead. Except, no, that's not true. But we have standing in for Winnie, Charles Lechner, is it?
Yes.
Charles Lechner from People for Bernie is going to be standing in for Winnie. How the discussion will work is we'll have each speaker speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the crowd for questions and comments. We have a huge crowd here today. If each speaker from the crowd can keep it to 2 minutes, that would be really excellent. We hope everyone can get a chance to speak, but that's probably not possible because we also want our panelists to give a chance to respond. So, Charles, kick us off, please.
That's terrible that I'm first.
This is just for recording.
I just also wanted to say I would betray my class for some water.
It's not working.
Sorry.
Mike isn't on.
No, that's just for recording.
Oh, I just wanted to start by saying I would betray my class for a bottle of water. Thank you so much. So I just want to take us back a year. A year wasn't so far ago. A few little vignettes. One was a meeting of what we might call the non-Democratic Party electoral left in Chicago, which I think was May a year ago. I wasn't there. You might correct me. At this meeting, a lot of folks got together and essentially, declared a commitment to fighting for more candidates like Kshama Sawant, who would run and win outside the two-party system in advanced left causes. A lot of these folks were really angry at Bernie Sanders for running as a Democrat, and many of them have signed a letter which will live in infamy explaining to him why he was wrong to run as a Democrat. Now, given last night, where 90% of the folks at the plenary acknowledged that they were voting for him, it seems kind of crazy to look back and see how so many of those folks didn't see the writing on the wall. That running inside the Democratic Party is precisely what got Bernie so much advantage, and it's how we got socialism to be the topic at dinner tables, large and small, across the country in every demographic. That's a huge victory. But I'm just gonna ask, I have this terrible memory from a year ago of being in a room like this, and the folks were applauding and booing as a way to express what they thought of the speakers. It was so terrible, I asked not to do that, at least with me. Thank you. So the second thing I remember is this feeling that was taking place in May and June, Bernie Sanders pretending to be a socialist and a leftist when he's really just a moderate European or something like that. One person expressed himself and said that a vote for Bernie Sanders means you have blood on your hands because his position on the Middle East isn't quite as pure as this gentleman's. And I was thinking to myself, this is the United States. This is the heart of the global empire. A mainstream European politics would be a massive improvement. How can we get there as fast as possible? And yet, at the same time, his race, his near victory, is demonstrating the limits of mainstream politics in the Democratic Party. It is a fact that the establishment lined up for Hillary Clinton. It is a fact that they used the DNC or the Nevada State Party chair or whatever methods and shenanigans they could to try and tilt the balance, and he's still doing better than 40%. What that shows is not how stupid it is to fight the establishment, it's how weak the establishment is. Just imagine if we could create more battles of this scale and in state levels and district levels and city council levels where we could show again and again how weak the establishment actually is. There's such a large population in the country that has decided with their feet, with their votes, that they are going to show up for a truly radical revolutionary agenda. And they're doing it from all walks of life. One of the problems with these people is they're not quite as politically pure and experienced as we are, which causes, it causes all kinds of problems. They don't know the right lingo, intersectionality. Sometimes they do things they shouldn't, like act as if they might throw a chair. Of course, they didn't throw a chair. We got to work on that. This is a huge movement. Millions of people are basically saying, okay, we're here, now what? So we have a choice. We can either tell these people how they're doing it wrong, who they ought to join, right? What the ideas are that we would like to pour into their brains, or we can do what an organizer does. Be one with them. Figure out what these grassroots leaderships need from us. Are they building organizations? Are they collecting dues? Are they founding new groups that could use our support? Are they running candidates we've never heard of before? Do they need technical help? Do they need money for us to fundraise? Do they need us to pay a little bit less attention to what we're already doing and a little bit more to what they're doing, even if it's new and imperfect? So along those lines, I would say for after this primary is over, for after the general election is over, I would say that those of us who have the most experience, and call it status privilege in the left, what we ought to do is take a look around and figure out who are we going to support? Who do we elevate? Who do we lift up? Millennials, people of color, folks from red states, people in communities that don't have a thick web of infrastructure like New York or San Francisco or whatever. That's what we need to do. And I would suggest that one of the most important things we ought to take into consideration is that the decisions being made by these local people, these local leaders, is not going to flow from thought leaders on high down to the grassroots as received wisdom. It ought to flow from the bottom on up. And that means that different people in different states are going to make different decisions about whether to endorse Hillary, about whether to support a third party, about what their focus is going to be. And maybe it's not on the national election, maybe it's on local races or 2017 or recruiting candidates or technical training. Whatever that is, these things ought to come from the bottom on up, not from the top on down. And as a result, People for Bernie is, until we change our minds, more or less committed to how do we amplify those voices? How do we knit together a community that so far has grown without that much of our close engagement and support? These people that show up at rallies, we don't know them. They weren't at our branch meeting last week. They don't know our names. We need to be going into their spaces, asking how do they want to do things. And I would say that should be the motto for how this movement grows over the next year as we run into 2017, which is an amazing opportunity. Bernie Sanders has left us an electoral map of where we're strong, where we're weak, where we can primary corporate mainstream Democrats, and where maybe we shouldn't even try, where we can get rid of Republicans from the Tea Party and replace them with really solid progressive democratic socialists. We need to look at that map and figure out, how do we invest our energy in supporting those people where Bernie did well, in the struggles the way they want to do it, and maybe, to use one of Winnie Wong's favorite word, decenter ourselves just a little bit.
Next up, we have Philip Walker, who is national spokesperson for Socialist Alternative and was the political director for Kshama Sawant's election and re-election campaigns. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Well, I think Charles made a number of quite important points, many of which I would agree with, but also in the spirit of comradely debate, I'm also going to explain how I disagree. But I would start by saying Charles is absolutely right that, that I remember I was here last year, and Kshama and I also were part of different panels where there was a lot of discussion and debate about the Sanders campaign. And I think from the point of view of Socialist Alternative, we approach things a little differently than Charles. But we, unlike the elements on the left, Charles, that you talked about a year ago, who were writing off Bernie Sanders, saying there was nowhere to go, we, from the very beginning of his campaign, have embraced it, have said there's enormous progressive content, enormous potential, and it's a huge opportunity to rebuild the leftist country. And we were arguing for that position, not just now, but a year ago. And I think looking back over the past year, it's absolutely true. Bernie Sanders has run an incredible, outstanding, remarkable campaign, and that none of us, even those of us who were excited a year ago, I don't think many of us would have expected the Sanders campaign would have had to the degree of the impact that it's had, of politicizing tens of millions of people, as you said, popularizing, making socialism a dinner table conversation in the heartlands of America, millions of tables, of popularizing, putting the question, if Bernie Sanders wasn't running, how would the fight for 15, would it still be on the same national agenda or not? The question of single-payer health care, of demonstrating beyond any doubt that it is possible to run a credible campaign with the resources needed without taking a penny in corporate money. Mm-hmm. All the time you hear politicians say, I wish I didn't have to take money from corporations. I wish I didn't have to beg the super rich for donations. But what choice do I have if I'm going to win? Bernie has shown without taking a penny in corporate money. He has made a class appeal to working people, to the labor movement, and he has raised an incredible over $200 million. Over 2.5 million people have donated to his campaign, over 7 million times. What an answer to the lies of people like Hillary Clinton, Mayor de Blasio here in New York, who say, my heart's in the right place, but I have to raise money from big pharma and the insurance companies, etc. Absolutely false. It's a political choice where you raise your money. And that where you raise your money sets your agenda. And Bernie has shown that it's possible. A year ago, Socialist Alternative was arguing that we did not think it was correct that Bernie Sanders ran as a Democrat. We were urging him to run as an independent. And we all know he chose, before he declared his candidacy a year ago, he was debating openly. He was considering running as an independent or running as a Democrat. Kshama spoke with him, has publicly appealed to him, and he in his wisdom, did not take our advice. He ran as a Democrat. And obviously there's advantages to that. And obviously he has shown there's certain, he has been able to achieve very commendable things with his campaign. But we also felt, while we honestly disagree with that, we didn't feel that was a need that meant that we couldn't work together and be part of the Sanders campaign, support the positive things. But what I disagree with Charles is continue to hammer away and warn and explain to a lot of those new people that Charles is correct in saying there's all these new people, fresh forces who are getting involved, that there's a role that socialists have to be able to connect with them, not stand on the sidelines and lecture, be involved in the movement, but also be honest. And the honest truth is the Democratic Party is not an instrument for progressive change. The Democratic Party is not our party. The Democratic Party is Hillary Clinton's party. The Democratic Party is the party of the warmongers. It's the party of Wall Street. It's the party of big pharma. It's the party of dirty oil and dirty energy. And it is completely hostile deeply hostile terrain for left-wing politics, for working class politics, or even mildly progressive politics. And I think the Bernie Sanders campaign has shown, on the one hand, the enormous support and enthusiasm for a working class agenda, but it's also shown how it's a dead end within the Democratic Party. He has won. How could you ask his campaign to have any more support? And has demonstrated beyond any doubt it is not possible to win within the Democratic Party. Could we really ask for a campaign that would have gotten more donors, more people involved, more support, more grassroots energy, more of a platform? What is it going to take to actually win a contest in the Democratic Party? The whole system was rigged against him, as has been said. And it's not just the rules. The rules are rigged against them, but it's the power of the corporate media. It's the power of corporate money. And it's also the character of the electorate that turns out in Democratic primaries. That electorate is not the most favorable terrain for working class politics and the left. It favors older voters. It favors loyal Democratic Party voters rather than independents and new people. It does not. It disfavors young people, poor people, people of color, etc. And under those constraints, we argued, and I think the experience of the past year has confirmed that it was naive to believe that Bernie could win. He would run a valuable campaign, but he will lose. And I think what we have to face up to now in May 2016, on the verge of the DNC, is Bernie Sanders' campaign will not succeed. He will be blocked in the Democratic Party. And that poses the question, what does he do next? And we've been we're not saying this as a side lecturers or people have been dismissing it. We've been actively involved. We launched Movement for Bernie. We've been involved in labor for Bernie. We've been fighting for resolutions in our unions. We've organized. We were at the forefront of organizing the marches for Bernie in January, February, and March. We campaigned. We did public debates with Clinton supporters. We urge all those who were registered as Democrats, which is not members of Socialist Alternative. We will not make that mistake. But for those of you who did, we said vote for Bernie. Give Koulouris the biggest blow possible. Kick her out. But if after a year of testing, the experience shows it's not going to be possible to win in this party, what is the lessons we draw? And I think the question is, at the DNC, when Clinton is anointed, the Democratic candidate, what does our movement do? And I think those of us who have some experience have an obligation to have a dialogue, to have a discussion, to listen, but also honestly put our view forward to the millions of new people, particularly young people, workers who are getting involved in the Sanders campaign. Sanders himself has a political obligation to give a lead to those people. What is in the best interest of this movement, this very valuable, this enormously wonderful movement that Bernie Sanders has opened up? I would say the best formula for destroying that movement, for demobilizing it, for demoralizing it, and discrediting it will be if Bernie makes a fundamental, historic mistake if he endorses Hillary Clinton. That will suck. That will suck all the energy, or enormous amounts of energy. It's possible it can continue on, but it will be a big blow to this movement, and it will create enormous confusion. His supporters have been mobilized because they're inspired that Bernie, unlike other candidates, is someone who actually has the nerve to say the really radical thing of telling people the truth. It is not the truth to say Hillary Clinton is going to represent working people, is going to represent the fight for single payer, is going to represent the fight for 15, is going to fight against the wars in the Middle East. That is nonsense. Of course, we need to make sure we fight against Trump, and I think Shama and others will speak about that. I'm not going to in my contribution, but I would say one thing on that Hillary Clinton is the worst possible way to fight Donald Trump. That is giving Donald Trump. That is actually doing him a favor if his opponent is Hillary Clinton. And I think what we would argue for is that Bernie should take this enormous momentum and say the Democratic Party, he wanted to test it out, he tried, but the Democratic Party has proven itself, the Democratic Party establishment has proven itself to be completely hostile to the interests of the vast majority of working people, and that he should continue running, joining up with the Green Party, with Jill Stein on an independent basis, independent of the Democratic Party, running, appealing to the Green Party to let him stand on their ticket with Jill Stein on a joint ticket and begin building what would be a historic change in U.S. politics. I don't think Bernie Sanders would win if he ran as independent in 2016 with Jill Stein. What I think he would do is it would be a campaign to begin building a new political force in this country, a party for the 99%, on a program like Bernie's, a progressive program, a working class, anti-corporate program, a party like Bernie that does not take a penny in corporate donations, But unlike what Bernie has done in the Democratic Party, a party that's not part of corporate politics, a new party that's completely independent of big business, that's completely dedicated to the interests of working people and progressive change and socialism. And a Sanders-Stein campaign in 2016 could fight to win 5, 10, 15 million votes in this election, which would be an earthquake in U.S. politics for an independent left-wing campaign with a bold program, on the same program Sanders saying, but also with the message working people need to get organized. The bosses have two parties, the Republicans and Democrats. Both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are servants of the billionaire classes. Obviously, there's differences between them. They're not the same, but they both will fundamentally represent the billionaires, not the 99%. And the 99% needs its own political voice. It needs its own political instrument. And Bernie could get that message out there by standing in the general election, and it would be linked to one of the things Charles was saying of running. The 2016 elections are not the be-all and end-all, but let's use it as an organizing opportunity to get that message out, to appeal to supporters to join a new party, and to start running independent candidates on a local level. Let's lay the basis for in 2017, we don't have this false choice of if you want to run, you have to run in the Democratic Party. Let's run hundreds of independent working class candidates for city council, for state houses, for Congress, in federal elections. Here in New York City, it's a one-party regime. There's no Republican Party. You could say that Bernie can't run as an independent in the general election because you have Trump. But why in New York should we not have independent candidates? Why didn't Zephyr Teachout run as an independent? In Seattle, I'll just end with this, Bryan. One of the few candidates that Bernie Sanders has supported is this woman named Pramila Jayapal, who us in Social Alternative, Shama, we've worked with. She endorsed Shama in the last election. I think Pramila stands on a very good left-wing program on many issues. I can tell you from being an activist in Seattle, there's no Republican Party. Socialist Alternative is stronger than the Republican Party in Seattle. Why is Pramila Jayapal running as a Democrat? And why not use her campaign? She could get elected and have the support of the labor movement, have the support of Bernie Sanders as an independent, like Bernie Sanders did in Vermont. So that is the general vision that we want to be putting forward of what's next for the Sanders campaign. Let's learn from our experience. Let's not keep banging our head against this wall of the Democratic Party, but let's begin building something that actually really represents our interests.
Our next speaker is Micah from Labor for Bernie, a longtime labor activist with the Teamsters, with the Teachers. I thought you said Teamsters earlier. Whatever. Teachers. And was also working on staff on the Bernie campaign. So I'll pass it over to Micah.
All right, I'm going to start. Good afternoon. Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay, I'm going to stay seated because this is very last minute. My notes are a little all over the place. First of all, just a show of hands, how many people would say that your main kind of venue for political activity is a labor union? Not labor, not a worker center, but a labor union. Okay, now keep your hand up if you're a member or a staffer of a union. Okay. Okay, good. So a lot of you will be familiar with a lot of what I think I'll discuss. And a lot of what I'm really interested in is actual structural reforms in the labor movement that I think labor people need to take on in the wake of what's happened with the Sanders campaign and the lack of overwhelming endorsements from unions for a candidate who really gave them everything they could want. His program was great, and he ran as a Democrat. I mean, there's no reason. It baffles me. Unions want to be on the side of the winner, and that's part of the problem. And there are rules that rig the game and how these endorsements are made. And that's something that union members can affect. But first, before going into that, I would say that I'm filling in for Justin Melito from the Writers Guild, who is filling in for Rand Wilson, who's the coordinator for Labor for Bernie. So if I get anything wrong, or if you disagree with me vociferously, definitely raise it. This is, like I said, a little hasty preparation, and there are far smarter, more eligible, whatever, people who could have done this in my place, but I got the call late last night, so doing it. So first of all, I would say that I agree with Charles about Bernie running as a Democrat. But that was the right move at the time. I think that what we see from his campaign is that, Charles, you might say that he's opened up space for us to primary other Democrats. I would say he's opened up space for third-party runs and for independent candidates. And I think that Shama's election already shows that you could do it before. And I think now there's really no doubt after this campaign that you can certainly do it now. And with union support, if we can change these rules in the unions, then we can win. I mean, then it's not just a question of running candidates, but really of winning them, because the unions remain, in my opinion, the most important civil society and organizations for working people in the country. They've stood the test of time. They are huge. They have resources, even under attack. Even with 7% density in the private sector, they're still really I think the strongest thing that we've got. The question is, what do you do with them, and what do they do? And I would agree with Philip, and this is kind of a joint why I wouldn't primary people, is that the other thing we've seen that this campaign has illustrated is how rigged the Democratic Party is. Now, there are people like Larry Cohen, who is fantastic, the former president of the CWA, who's a national advisor to the Sanders campaign, who there was a meeting before the Labor Notes conference in Chicago where about 125 union leaders, staffers, members got together to discuss this question of next steps for Labor for Bernie in terms of what do we do after and one of the things he wrote an article for in these times, and one thing he talks about is reforming not just the electoral system, but the rules of the Democratic Party. And I'm not sure, I think that they could be. I think that in the long run you could change some of these rules, and Jesse Jackson in 1988 did try it, and they tried to halve the number of superdelegates. That was never implemented. There were other rules that they did change successfully, like they used to have majority primaries, like the Republicans do. It's now proportional primaries. So there are ways of changing the rules, but is it worth it? And how long would it take? Do we need to do that? And I think that you see from the Sanders campaign that maybe his campaign opened up space. He could have run as an independent. He could have done very well, I think. But by running as a Democrat, he's illustrated the limitations that we all knew existed. He's made it crystal clear when they're deciding precincts in Iowa by coin tosses. I mean, how ridiculous is that? Or the stuff that happened in Nevada. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things that really, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the way the DNC has put up every single roadblock. We really now see what a lot of people already thought or would say they knew. It's illustrated. And it's illustrated for people across, apolitical people who were mobilized by Bernie. Now we're getting kicked out of, they can't get into conventions to which they were elected. I mean, they're pissed. And they see that these rules are no good. Some people are going to want to change the rules. That's great. But I would say, why spend the time on this? So now a little bit about Labor for Bernie, just briefly some history on it for those who are interested in that kind of thing. It was actually started as two different projects, one by folks from Occupy Wall Street, and two labor organizers, Justin Melito from the Writers Guild, who was supposed to be here, and Jeff Ray. They started with a website and a Facebook group. They had a letter to sign on as individuals if you were an endorser. The other group was started by Rand Wilson, who's the coordinator of Labor for Bernie, who's been at various unions and done fantastic stuff over his career. And John Murphy, who I have here in my notes. I was told he's a carpenter, so I assume a rank and file member of the Carpenters. And John Murphy, who was a member of Local 40 of the Carpenters. Is that what you said?
Last time I was in Boston.
Awesome. All right. That's correcting me. Okay, good. They combined their efforts after Bernie officially announced his candidacy last May. Their initial focus was to prevent union endorsements of Hillary, which I don't know that we can attribute to them, the AFL staying out of it, but obviously the lack of endorsements for Hillary is a tacit endorsement of Bernie, right? I mean, that's the way I would read that from the unions. And to actively encourage local unions to endorse Bernie. And I think they had some success. They worked to build capacity. They used labor organizing. They worked to build capacity by growing lists, setting up Facebook pages in different states. Hundreds of folks signed that letter of endorsement in each state, which they then again used the letter to build lists, connect people, identify local leaders to spearhead statewide campaigns. And in some cases, the campaign even brought on staff. I was brought on not as a staff member of the campaign, but as kind of a consultant to liaise with Labor for Bernie in New York in advance of the primary. And we were able to draw tons of volunteers in to do get out the vote activities. And just some statistics on their reach that they built, because I think it is kind of impressive. Well, first of all, they built local organizations in Albany, Buffalo, Chicago, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, New York City, Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, Iowa, Maine, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and beyond. We've worked on, Labor for Bernie folks have worked on get out the vote in most primary and caucus states. There's now the next thing is holding conference calls with state labor leaders and encouraging activists to canvass in their workplaces to identify supporters for the remaining primaries for get out the vote. And encouraging union members to run for delegates to the Democratic Party's convention in July. So the statistics on the reach were more than 12,000 supporters, a Facebook page with 27,000 likes, this is as of early April, and traffic of almost 400,000 hits per week. Now, 7 national unions actually ended up endorsing Sanders, and I don't know if we can attribute that to our efforts, but the Amalgamated Transit Union, the postal workers, the communications workers, obviously, the National Nurses United, the National Union of Healthcare Workers on the West Coast, and UE. And am I missing one?
NISNA.
And NISNA, and the New York State Nurses. No, they're not national, though. I was thinking of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's somebody else. Anybody know? No. Okay.
ILWU.
ILWU, and ILWU, of course. So 7 unions ended up endorsing, and then 90 plus local unions, regional bodies, often denying their international officers' endorsements and their international organizations' endorsements. So that's where I come up on what I think labor particularly can do, which is, for example, when the AFT endorsed, and I worked at UFT at the local union here in New York for a long time, so I'm stepping out there a little bit. When the AFT endorsed Sanders, there really was a revolt among the teachers.
Clinton.
Endorsed Hillary. There was a revolt. Endorsed Hillary. There was a revolt, and it showed up. I was doing communications and social media at the time. Well, I wasn't there any longer, but I heard from folks that was I still there? I can't remember. I think I was there. Anyway, you saw it on all our social media. People kind of chiming in, saying how this is wrong, and there's CWA had a very transparent process, and the leadership was even pushing for Sanders. But most unions don't. I mean, unions have, just look at how bad their processes are for electing their own officers. Until 1991, the Teamsters, and this is a pet project of mine, didn't have direct election of their own national officers. They were elected at a convention where the convention delegates were basically the heads of the local unions, which were all controlled by Hoffa people. So anyway, it's not good. I think that one thing that members, that obviously we've got these 7 unions that have endorsed Sanders, and I would say for them, those are the places where unions should push. And if you're in one of those unions, push for them to next time endorse an independent candidate, to push for Bernie to run as an independent. That's what you do if you're in those 7 unions. They were good enough that they endorsed Sanders. Now, I don't know what their rules are specifically around choosing endorsements, but we got a good result, at least this time. If you're in a union that didn't endorse Sanders, if you're a member or if you're a local officer or a regional officer in a union where maybe you went for Sanders at that level, but your national didn't, they either stayed out of it or they endorsed Hillary, I think that we need to strategize. And again, I don't know what this would look like. Every union is different. But one thing that I think labor folks can look at for the future, and this is technical, I realize that, but let's look at the way these endorsements are made. And let's bring resolutions to change it. Why isn't there? I think if you had direct election or direct voting on endorsements at all levels, you would see totally different candidates win. In that 1991 election, when it was a RICO lawsuit that got rid of the federal government intervened in the Teamsters to change it to a direct election. A lot of people have problems with that. But in 1991, Ron Carey, reformer, first election, open election when the members could actually vote, they voted in a progressive reformer. So I think if you let the members of the unions vote, you might see very different endorsements, including, at the minimum, more progressive Democrats. And at the most, you could see unions endorsing third-party candidates. Let's start at the local level. Let's start at the regional level. But I think that there are structural impediments and rules about how, often if there is a vote of any kind, the leadership chooses who they're going to endorse, maybe in consultation with the membership, and they make the endorsement. In all my time at UFT, never saw, maybe there were a few endorsements that were put off, but anybody who our political director and who the leadership brought, I see a coworker who can agree with this, the UFT, the delegate assembly, always went with the endorsements of the political candidates. And why is our delegate assembly deciding this? Why not open it up to the membership at large to vote on national questions or on major on federal level politicians, for example? So I think that's a question to look at, and will help all the rest along in terms of the elections themselves. Awesome.
Okay, folks, we've got about an hour total, and we've got precisely 1 million people in this room. So we're gonna need everyone to be respectful, keep their comments to 2 minutes, and also with the understanding that some of us won't get the chance to speak. Oh, the microphone? Holy crap!
Yeah, you forgot.
That's insane. Shama is, holy crap, that's wild. I did that just to get you guys to revolt against me so it would look a bit like the Nevada thing. Remember, he didn't throw the chair. So Shama Sawant, do I need to introduce Shama Sawant to all of you? Shama Sawant is Seattle's socialist alternative member who has been elected to city council not once, but now I'm proud to say that I worked on 2 election campaigns where Shama was overwhelmingly elected by the voters of Seattle. She's been at the forefront of the Fight for 15 campaign, where Seattle became the first city, one of many cities, to win a $15 an hour minimum wage. Seattle was also the first city to not recognize Columbus Day and instead recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, with a motion proposed by Shama. And also, with Shama's pushing on the city council, often against Democratic Party politicians, we've won a series of housing justice victories as well in recent months and weeks as well. So please give a warm welcome to Shama Sawant. That was funny.
Thank you, everybody. And Bryan is a hardworking organizer for Socialist Alternative, so excuse his lapse of memory. He works a lot. I thank all the speakers who came before me, especially Charles and Micah, who, I think spoke really well, despite the fact that they had very little time to think about the discussion. And I think this can be a very rich discussion. I wanted to add a few points about Trump, and I'll need a few minutes for that, because I think that unless we talk about the question of Trump and lesser evilism, we cannot really have a full discussion about where our movement should go, because this is where everybody is right now. What should we do right now? And we cannot think of a forward progress for our movement without resolving that question, and we have to grapple with that seriously. Just to lay out the groundwork of why we are seeing this incredible and bizarre phenomenon that's happening in the presidential election year, I think it's important to understand that the vast majority of people who see themselves as supporting Trump are not just rabid racists and misogynists and Islamophobists. I mean, there is a certain current of racism that runs in the United States, just like any other country. My home country, India, has a Hindu fundamentalist current. But if you asked me what is the overall consciousness of people in India, it is absolutely not fundamentalist in any way. Similarly, in America, the vast majority of people overall are not right-wing. This moment in history is showing that America is actually moving to the left, I guess I should say. But you do also inexplicably, in some ways, see the ascendancy of a really despicable sort of version of right-wing ideology through Donald Trump. And it's important for us to understand why that's happening. It's not happening because the vast majority of Americans have suddenly woke up and found themselves to be right-wing. What's happening is that the majority of American people, especially the younger generations, are angry at the corporate establishment and are looking for alternatives to that corporate political establishment, and are looking for ways to fight back. They are grappling with that. And Trump, having cleverly, despicably, but cleverly posed as an anti-establishment alternative, is taking some people in. But I would say that the fact that Trump is experiencing this kind of rise is just a different way in which this change in society is being expressed, and the vast majority of that change is being expressed to the support for Bernie. I mean, the media in the media establishment, which is very much controlled by the elite of America, of corporate America, they have reported every Trump rally that happened. But look at the numbers that go to Trump rally, maybe 5,000, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Look at the numbers that go to Bernie's rallies. 30,000, 40,000 people just spilling over into the roads and sidewalks, just refusing to leave because they're hungry for this message of a political revolution against the billionaire class. And what is happening is because the Democratic Party has done everything and is doing everything in its power to stymie his campaign, Trump is experiencing a little bit of an echo, but it is done, as we have said, very, very cynically. And poll after poll on individual issues, right from the Truman era, and I like to make this point, because I'm an immigrant, and I meet a lot of Americans saying, well, what can you do with America? America is right-wing. America, my American sisters and brothers, is not right-wing. America is very left-wing. Poll after poll on individual issues like funding for public education, funding to deal with poverty, curtailing the military budget, taxing the wealthy. Poll after poll since the Truman era shows that Americans have been looking for a change. What has happened in the last 3 to 5 decades is that there has been, for a combination of various reasons, a real decimation of the activist layer, a real systematic attack against the labor movement, going on for decades, that has pushed us on the back foot. But that doesn't mean people have ideologically shifted that way. People are actually ideologically shifting leftward. And in fact, what is happening now, and look at the increasing bizarreness of the phenomenon of the presidential primaries. Now that Hillary looks like the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, you can see Trump starting to pose as if he is to the left of Hillary. He has railed against trade deals, and we know it is absolutely cynical and disingenuous on his part, but can anybody fact check him if he says that Clinton was responsible, or part of the establishment that was responsible for NAFTA? We cannot, because that's the truth. The Clinton establishment has been one of the purveyors, part of the purveyors of these trade deals. Can anybody fact check anyone pointing out that Hillary Clinton stood on the board of Walmart for 6 years? How can somebody who positioned herself as an advocate for a purveyor of low wages for women claim to be representing the interests of working class women? And so I think that it's a little bit of a circular logic we're dealing with when people tell us that, well, we agree, we all supported Bernie, we all did the right thing, but now it's time for unity. In order to defeat Trump, we all have to, however distasteful it might be, get behind Hillary, because that's what needs to be done. But that's why I want to point out the circular logic. The people who are supporting Trump, the majority of them are supporting him because they're angry at the establishment, of which Clinton is the very epitome. So it makes no sense to say that if you want to peel away votes from Trump, you're going to present as an alternative the very thing that makes people go towards Trump. That makes no sense. But it is even more important. I'm laying it out in terms of the electoral parameters of this year, but it is much deeper than that, and it is important for an analysis to go beyond that. Trump as a phenomenon did not arise out of a political vacuum. Trump is the incarnation, which is a result of a rightward shift by the establishment parties, both Democratic and Republican parties, over the last many decades. Republicans have moved rightward, the Democrats have moved rightward, and if there was ever any room for working class politics in the Democratic Party, and I'm not making that claim, but if there ever was any space, that space has completely been squeezed out. I think a lot of people who are advocating for a vote for Hillary are agreeing with that, and yet are going to argue that we need to somehow vote for Hillary. And I think that the other thing that we need to deal with is the question of the relationship between what should our position be this year and the question of building mass movements. we will often hear people saying, well, this is why I stay away from electoral politics. That's why we just need to keep building our movements. Every time that there's a presidential election year, it derails our movements. And that is true. It does derail our movement. But by sticking our head in the sand and saying we're not going to take a position on Trump versus Hillary, Trump versus Clinton, because we just need to keep building our movements, sort of misses the point that in order to actually build our mass movement, whether it is to win $15 an hour at the national level, whether it is for single-payer healthcare, funding for public education, as Bernie says, taxing Wall Street speculation to make public universities free. You pick any item, any demand from Bernie's platform, in order to win any of them, it would be an almighty battle for mass movements to win any of those reforms. But in that battle, we will be cutting off an arm and a leg of that movement if we said that we are not going to explicitly challenge the domination of the Democratic Party and their systematic betrayal of our movements decade after decade. And I want to give you a concrete example. In our fight for 15 in Seattle, I was elected before, we won 15 6 months after I was elected. And during our campaign in 2013, we raised prominently the banner of $15 an hour. When we ran throughout that campaign, not a single politician came forward in support of $15 an hour.
No,
and as Philip said, there is no Republican Party to speak of in Seattle. It's just the Democrats. If there are any systematic problems in Seattle, they fall at the doorstep of the Democratic Party that has ruled the city, just like the Democratic Party has ruled Chicago. And you can see what's happened with the teachers union, with housing, with the question of police brutality towards the black community. So when we ran our campaign, we prominently talked about $15 an hour. Not a single corporate politician stepped in and promoted it. But when we won our campaign and we were coming close to winning, we had the mayoral candidate who ultimately became the mayor supporting 15, in a formal way. But we need to make a distinction between Democratic politicians who will follow movements, recognize that they need to express support of it in order to win an election, make a distinction between that and our own candidates who will fight, who will fight boldly for those demands, run campaigns on that basis, win or lose. And I think that's extremely important. And what our experience shows was that everything that we said during our campaign, far from being a barrier to winning, was precisely the reason we won. That we called ourselves an open socialist, that we ran in defiance of the Democratic Party establishment, that we called for $15 an hour and taxing the rich. That was precisely that what that allowed us to win the campaign. And what happened after that, right after I was elected, was that the mayor called a committee of big business and labor and asked me to be a part of that, expecting that I would be marginalized, and I would say I would be a purist, and I agree with Charles. We should not have a purist mentality. What the mayor thought was that we would refuse to participate in this committee because we would refuse to be part of an establishment, organization, essentially. What we did was we publicly accepted that invitation, but we said that my hands will not be tied in any way to the establishment by membership in this committee, and that I will be on this committee as a shop steward for the workers of Seattle. And in order to actually have 115, it was essential that we had our own position on the Seattle City Council. And something that we did after we won our election through Socialist Alternative, I launched the 15 Now campaign, the Grassroots campaign, that filed a ballot initiative that was ultimately the threat. That was the only reason big business finally capitulated to our demands, finally condescended to say, if we don't pass this, we have something bigger waiting for us in the wings. We better do this now. So it was an example of wringing out concessions from the establishment, but I include running our own independent candidates as an essential component of this, because if we hadn't had our seat at that table, I am not clear that we would have won 15 at all. It is now the narrative of the political establishment is that we brought everyone together and we worked out a grand compromise. But that is not what happened behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, it was, as I said, an almighty battle against big business, but we are only able to conduct that battle. It's not just a question of integrity, in your mind. It's a question of what makes you effective. What was the reason that made me effective in fighting against big business? It was that I was independent of big business because, as was said before, I did not take a penny from big business. But that's not enough. You also have to be independent from the Democratic Party establishment because the Democratic Party establishment is tied to big business. So as long as you are tied to the Democratic Party establishment, big business gets to influence your ability to fight for workers. So my sisters and brothers, this is not about good intentions or running good candidates. It's about having good intentions and putting them to the most effective use. And it is not effective to have good intentions if you are going to be beholden to a party that is fundamentally antagonistic to our interests. There are other examples that show the need for independent politics as well. Just very briefly, I'll recount to you. If you look at why Canada was able to win its single-payer healthcare system, it was precisely because the labor movements and mass movements there fought for independent left parties. And it was the development of independent politics in that manner that established single-payer healthcare in one province and then put so much pressure on the establishment parties to bring forward single-payer healthcare nationally. So even if we are talking about, I would not advocate this, because I'm a socialist and I'm fighting for systemic change away from capitalism. But even if our calculation was simply, what is the best way to win the reforms that we are wanting to win? I would say not only the best way, but really the only way of winning any of these reforms is to take that first step of breaking from the Democratic Party. We cannot talk about running good candidates in the abstract unless we build an independent party for ourselves. And I know that there are ideas, that were brought forward, legitimate questions. Shouldn't we change the Democratic Party rules? Aren't people waking up? Aren't people understanding because of Bernie's run that the Democratic Party doesn't, at this moment, is not set up for us? We need to do something. Yeah, that's a fair question to ask. But my response to the idea of changing the ground rules in the Democratic Party is, one, look how they are fighting tooth and nail against their own party members who are supporting Bernie Sanders. So let's not kid ourselves that it is somehow going to be a fair and square debate that we will win because the majority of the base supports this kind of change. It is not going to be like that. But a more fundamental point I would make is why? Why at a historic moment when millions, tens of millions of Americans are looking for an independent agenda away from corporate parties, should we be lagging behind the grain of history? We should be looking ahead and recognizing that it is not that previous period anymore. This is the post-Occupy movement period. This is the period when people all across the world are looking for new avenues of fight back. Why? Why should we sacrifice this enormous energy and momentum towards resurrecting failed strategies? And I want to say, people will also bring up other questions. Again, legitimate questions people are grappling with. Well, you can't win as an independent. And of course, our first response is, we won in Seattle. And again, legitimately, people could say, well, you're not going to win every single time. And of course, we would never claim that we would win every single time. There is no such thing. I can't have a crystal ball and say every time we run a socialist alternative candidate, we would win. We didn't win our first campaign in 2012 when we ran for the state house. But here's the point. As long as we try to run within the Democratic Party, we might win candidates, but that's not but winning candidates is not the question. Can we win social change by running Democrats is the question. And what we have seen again and again is that there are good candidates, and I agree with Charles, there are good people everywhere. The problem with good people running in a bad party is that you get bad outcomes despite good people. And you can see the new polls that are indicating what moment of history we are in. A new poll just came out, I think 3 days ago, which said that 65% of likely voters in America are open to a candidate other than Clinton and Trump. But here's the real thing. 91% of those who are under the age of 28 say that they would like an independent alternative to Clinton and Trump. Those are the millions of young people that our organizations have to be speaking to, because that is the generation of activists that is going to come to the fore in the next few years. And what we do this year is not detached from the question of what we do the next few years. And I would ask a very simple question as far as not just this year. There may be people who say, I won't vote for Hillary this year, but I still think that the Democratic Party is okay. We'll run good candidates in the Democratic Party all over. I would say this: if defeating Trump's agenda was the primary, priority of the Democratic Party, then why didn't they do everything in their power to pick the candidate who, by all accounts, every poll, looks set to deliver a thumping defeat to Trump if he were to be the Democratic Party nominee? Why is it that they have chosen the weakest possible representative in order to counter Trump? And look at the political circus we are in this year, right? We have the least popular presidential candidate running from a major party in the last 10 presidential cycles, running against the second least popular presidential candidate in the last 10 presidential cycles. That speaks to the real polarization in society. The real polarization in American society is not between a bunch of left-wing people, working people, and a bunch of right-wing, left-working people. The polarization is between the vast ocean of working people who feel alienated from politics and from every social agenda, and the elite who are completely out of touch. And those elite, those parties deserve to crumble. Why should we be spending our movement's energy in trying to prop them up when they have failed us so systematically? And ultimately, we need organizations. We wouldn't have won. I know everybody wants to talk about our victories in Seattle as Shama Sawant did something great. Please know that nothing we did was any single person's effort. But not just that. No campaign is a single person's effort. But unlike the corporate political parties where candidates run mostly, despite some with good intentions, to promote their own personal political careers, Socialist Alternative, the way we run our campaigns, offers a model for what we believe that independent party for the 99% should be doing, which is having an actual say for every person who carries a membership card of that party, having a say in what the platform of the campaign should be, having a say on who the candidate should be, and ensuring that everything about political campaigns is tied to the movements we are fighting for and is absolutely in service of the working class and not in service of personal careers. And we would not have been able to do what we did had we not had a cohesive organization. And that's the kind of vision we have to have in mind if we are to actually challenge the Democratic Party. Not just have meetings where we say we don't want to challenge, but actually challenge. Like having meetings like this, this could be a chapter of the new independent, party for the 99%, but we have to start working towards this. And I thought Micah, I need to finish soon, but I just wanted to add a few things. I thought Micah brought very important points up about the labor movement, and he said that the labor movement, the labor bureaucracy likes to back winning candidates, and there's of course truth to that. When we ran in 2013. The largest unions, including SEIU in Seattle, said that they didn't see a path to victory. I'm actually quoting them. But we did win. And that's true. But there is much more to it than that. There's much more to explain what the labor bureaucracy has been doing for decades. It's their ties to the Democratic Party that paralyze the labor movement. It is not simply that they want to win. And we should absolutely fight for structural reforms within the labor movement. We need to have democratic elections, and I really agree with every single point that Micah talked about in terms of the UFT. I mean, I'm a rank and file member of the AFT in Seattle, and I know that there is widespread anger among the rank and file about the endorsement of Clinton without any due process, really. We weren't asked for a vote. But this is what I would say. We cannot make this kind of change within the labor movement, again, by good intentions alone. That fight for democracy within the labor movement is ultimately tied to a fight for an independent party politically, because the labor bureaucracy that stymies democracy within the labor movement is also the labor bureaucracy that is tied to the Democratic Party and prevents independent politics from rising up. So I would say that we should absolutely be fighting within the labor movement, but we need for that, in order for that to be successful, to be tied to the larger question of independent politics. And this is the last thing I'll say. Our petition on movementforbernie.org urges people, when we urge people to look at the petition, what it asks you to do is sign on to urging Bernie to run as an independent if he does not get the Democratic Party nomination. If you haven't done so, please sign the petition and share it with everybody you know who is looking for answers in this historic political era. But I will also say this. If Bernie does not run as an independent, and if he says that let's all, even if he makes a muted endorsement of Hillary Clinton, we should not accept that. And our movement should not whitewash that decision by him because he has done a really incredible thing. I mean, I would thank him with all my heart for his service in running this campaign as an open socialist, running to really energize a whole generation of young people that wasn't politicized before. But we should also, our loyalty is not to Bernie Sanders. Our loyalty is to the movement that is fighting for social change. And so we should absolutely be urging Bernie and pushing Bernie to take this step. But if he does not, we have to take this step ourselves. We have to call for national conferences to discuss the question of an independent party, to discuss a party with real democratic structures that will be able to start building a political fight back against the establishment.
Okay, so now we've got 3 questions. I want to turn it back to the panel for any of the questions you want to answer. What are the possibilities of how this all plays out in this election cycle? A direct question to Philip about Zephyr Teachout. That might be something you want to discuss in the hallways, but if it leads to a broader point, that's good. And also, how do we counteract the corporate media and strategies to defeat the right-wing media? Does anyone on the panel want to come in on these questions?
I could take number one just briefly. I think that the idea of a third party run on the petition is great, but I think the idea that just to take out one possibility from the various possibilities that we see, right? The idea of Sanders running on a third party as an independent after the convention, I appreciate the effort to petition to get that to happen, but I think we should all be clear, he is not going to do that. I mean, he is very, very committed. He said from the outset he won't do that. And so I think that you have to understand, I think we have to look at the idea of pushing that. I would love for him to do that, but I think the idea of pushing it is more about consolidating, and I don't know if this is what you guys are thinking, but I would see it more as consolidating the momentum he's built around the idea of running somebody who's willing to eventually as a third party or an independent, as a third party candidate or independent, unless the Republicans split. And you mentioned Romney or the possibility. Yeah. If Romney runs or somebody does and the Republicans actually do split, then I think the idea of maybe Sanders reconsiders. I don't know, and there should be serious pressure on him in that case because it's going to be like the Wild West. I mean, if it's a 3-way race, and then Hillary could very easily win it. She'll kill, but Sanders could get it. And then in terms of the media, it's in terms of Sanders specifically, they're already covering it. So whether he runs as a third party or a Martian, whatever, he's going to get the coverage this cycle. The question for the future of other candidates, I think, is different. But Well, he's already getting enough coverage that the coverage he's got.
I'm going to keep it on the panel to see if there are any other questions that, since not all have been addressed. Yeah.
Just quickly on Howie's question, I agree. The point was rhetoric about Zephyr Teachout. I think the reason she's not running as an independent is she is dedicated to reforming the Democratic Party. But my point was, what practical reason is there not to run as independent in New York, where the Democrats have a monopoly, where there's not a Republican threat? But I agree, she's making a mistake of doing that. On the petition, what was just said, I agree, and I would urge everyone in this room, if you haven't signed it yet, Shama mentioned it, on movementforbernie.org, we have a petition that Shama initiated calling on Bernie to run as an independent in the general election as a tool to begin building a new party in this country. And over 30,000 people have signed that. And I would urge everyone here to add their name to it and share it online. Our thinking, it's true, Bernie Sanders has said he does not intend to do that, and he plans to endorse the Democratic nominee. But I would point out, one, that Bernie's positions has changed on issues. If you look at the Black Lives Matter protesters, again, earlier this year, they had an impact. His position on the criminal justice system, on BLM issues, on racial justice issues improved under the pressure of that. When Shama was elected in 2013 and we were putting the question of 15 on the agenda and we were launching 15 Now, Shama asked Bernie Sanders to endorse 15 Now and join us on doing that. He actually, unfortunately, said no. He refused to do that. He came out, though, with the Fight for 15 getting stronger and stronger. When he launched his campaign in 2015, he came out strongly for 15. So my point is, we shouldn't underestimate, he can be pushed, and that's to his credit. So I don't think it's very likely, but I would say if the left got its act together and actually really put some real heat under Bernie Sanders, I wouldn't rule out that he could push him beyond what he's currently said. But the last thing I'll say is, even assuming that he doesn't take that necessary step and he endorses Clinton, what was said I think is absolutely true. We want to, even if Sanders doesn't heed the advice of that petition, the bigger that petition is, the more debate and discussion we have, we can reach his supporters, which is the most important thing. And we want to mobilize his supporters for the idea that we are not going to support Hillary Clinton. We want a real challenge in the general election. We need to build a new party. And I agree with Howie that if Sanders doesn't run, which is what's most likely, people absolutely should support Jill Stein. And we want to use the momentum behind our petition to lay the basis. If Sanders fails to take the demands of that petition forward, we will be advocating for people to vote for Jill Stein.
Do you want anything to add, Shama, before?
Sure. Just first of all, on that point about Jill Stein, I also completely agree with Howie that, the question is, what should we be doing this election year? And what I would say, and what Socialist Alternative would say is, we need to support the strongest possible left alternative to the corporate candidates. And Bernie is, at this moment, unlikely to, and I agree with you on that, but I also agree with the points that Philip made that, things are shifting, the terrain keeps shifting every day, so you don't know what's going to happen. And our petition is extremely important because it spurs on debate. And in fact, I think we all, those of us who've been on the left for a little while, I think we tend to underestimate how deeply younger people are thinking about independent politics. Not in very well formulated ways in which people who are in parties already are thinking about it, but they're thinking about it in general. Like where should we go from here if Bernie loses? And I think the petition is an important tool to reach many of them. We have now more than 30,000 people who have signed this petition, and obviously the way consciousness shifts and movements happen and victories, working class win victories, is not that everybody in the working class agrees all at once. Things shift, and there are more advanced people, people who are thinking ahead of other people, and we should be reaching those people. We should not be holding everyone back because not everybody agrees about independent politics. There are now, historically speaking, more people agreeing about independent politics than there were even 2 years ago, and that's the point of this petition. I would also say that, Philip mentioned this, but just it bears repetition. If Sanders were to run jointly with Stein on a Green Party ticket, that would, as he said, be nothing short of a political earthquake. But if he refused, we should absolutely be supporting Jill Stein. And in fact, Jill Stein's campaign has a very good program, and it serves as a sort of a model for the kind of program that we should be fighting for in our independent candidates. There was a question about media. I wanted to quickly respond to that. yes, the media establishment, no surprise, is controlled by the political establishment. I mean, different wings of the establishment don't function independently. The media is part of the apparatus that the ruling class uses against the working class and against working people in general. And so it's no surprise that Bernie went from having a virtual media blackout to having a media assault carried out on him, especially heading into the New York State primaries. I mean, when we ran our campaign, we didn't get very much media at all. We virtually had a media blackout. And towards the end of our first campaign, we actually had a media hit, using some irrelevant details of my personal life were, that was used to, the first real media we got was a hit piece, which actually ended up helping us win because people were disgusted at that kind of, manipulation. But I would say that in Bernie's case, just look at what's breathtaking is not the fact that the media has behaved the way it has behaved. We know that's not a surprise. What's intense in my mind is that despite that media blackout, from day one, Bernie has had tens of thousands of people swirling around him. So despite all the obstacles laid in our paths, what it tells us is that consciousness of working people, goes beyond that, is able to surmount that. And I don't mean that if we can surmount all of it in 1 year and win the election. I also don't make the absurd claim that if he had run as an independent, he would have won the election. But the point is that we have to step back and not lock our thinking of movements into presidential election year cycles. Movements don't get built in one presidential year and then another presidential year and so on. We can't think of it as presidential politics. Politics is larger than that. And ultimately what we did was old-fashioned organizing, going door to door, talking to people, and you'll be surprised when you run an independent candidate and challenge openly the Democratic and Republican Party establishment at the kind of support you will get because people are looking for that kind of fight back.
So pass it back to the panel. We've got questions about movement building, organizing on college campuses, etc. You want to come in?
Yeah. Anyone here like boxing?
I used to when it was
Okay,
good.
so now for a boxing metaphor. Imagine, good job. Imagine after the fight that was decided on points, 9 or 15 grueling rounds, and the losing boxer comes out and says, I know I lost and I know why. It's because I only had one opponent. Give me two and I'll win for sure. Let me show you. And I think that is part of the mentality of folks that are emphasizing forming an independent party that will somehow, overturn this terrible system that we have that gives so many protections and influence to this two-party system that we live under. And what's weird is that instead of pointing out the weaknesses of this two-party system, the ways in which it can be manipulated by a reality TV star and completely upended, or how self-driven media like Facebook is able to totally overturn the wishes of the establishment, instead of diminishing the role of what passes for a Democratic Party establishment and showing how it's a paper tiger, it's weak, it's helpless when people are mobilized. They can't actually stop people like Shama Sawant winning in Seattle, even when they all get together and try. Who knows what other victories are possible if we stop taking their power for granted and start treating it like something weak. In the United States, the Democratic Party isn't even a single ballot line. It's at least 50 ballot lines state by state, and many more if you look at the cities. These ballot lines are very weak. Their institutional power isn't nearly as influential as we think. When you talk about things like open primaries versus closed primaries, what you're seeing is parties in New York are so terrified of the voters that they don't want to have open primaries. Getting an open primary in a place like New York State is a more meaningful advance to winning working class power than this or that third party. And I'll go beyond that. The emphasis on party building is like generals who have excellent plans for the last war. What we've learned is that parties really are very weak, and that in the past, a party had a function. It corralled the forces necessary to run a competitive campaign. And if you didn't have a strong party behind you, then you couldn't run a good campaign that had a chance of winning. But now, so many other parts of society and politics have the ability to muster the force necessary to run a good campaign, that in proportion, the actual parties are now much weaker, which explains why Bernie was able to rise. Just to talk for a second about a group I'm part of, People for Bernie, we did a count. How many interactions did we have on Facebook over the last year? 2.5 billion. 2.5 billion. Having looked, billion, is more interactions on social media than just about any other group on the left, and I'll be generous and include groups that are much less left than us in that. Almost no one has had that kind of impact and influence on the device that everyone is looking at nonstop, even in this room. And why? Because Facebook has a business model that relies on our attention more so than even on the ad dollars. Our attention leads to ad dollars, not the other way around. So instead of fighting against big media, instead of fighting against a weak, hollow Democratic Party that is incredibly divided, we should be asking the question, where are we strong enough to take it over? Where is it possible for us to decenter that establishment? And I would argue that the map of primary results is a roadmap. Sometimes a roadmap for an independent candidate because the system in that area calls for it. Other times, it's a roadmap for getting people to run for state committee seats so that they can do other stuff statewide. But what's important is not to fetishize the party or the independent status, but to look at all of it purely at a tactical level and not elevate them to the level of principle. If the Democratic Party actually had principles, and they were what Hillary Clinton espouses, there's no way that Bernie Sanders would be getting the vote totals that he is.
Anyone else on the panel? I could take up the college campuses thing if you want. Just to take up, I think it is worth noting the question about college campuses, and it relates to the other question about building movements. When Bernie Sanders was on TV and he called for a tuition-free college and a canceling of all student debt, it was put to him the question. They said, that's crazy. You've got a Republican House, a Republican Senate. How are you going to do that? And I think he answered it very well. He said, what would be able to achieve that with those type of corporate-controlled forces in halls of power is 1 million students out on the streets demanding free college tuition, demanding an end to student debt. Socialist Alternative set up, along with many other groups, particularly groups in the Black Lives Matter movement, set up a group called Million Student March based on that call. And we called for an end to student debt. We called for college, free tuition for college, and we called marches around the country as well, linked up with Black Lives Matter and the struggle, particularly at University of Missouri. And I think that gives an indication of how movement building can interact with politics, but then also I would raise something else about the need for independent and working class politics, and to build, even at times when it seems like you can't win, to prepare the basis for when those movements explode that challenge the Democratic Party. In Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, right, is mayor 1%, and he is part of the establishment of the Democratic Party. When there was another cover-up of a racist police killing, the main demand that came to the forefront of those marches was Rahm, resign. That's what came out of the social movement of the teachers. That's what came out of the social movement of the black community. The question is very quickly posed, who do you replace that racist corporate Democratic Party mayor? What infrastructure do you have to defeat him, right? And that's why the question of an independent party for working class people, of independent politics, is connected precisely to how to win victories for our social movement.
I think, just to come back to what Charles was saying in the last round, I think he makes a lot of strong points about how weak the establishment is, and we should have confidence they can be defeated. My question is, why is the conclusion from that, given they're so weak, we should prop up their party, the Democratic Party? I draw the conclusion, I agree, this election shows how weak the establishment is and how they can be challenged, they can be defeated. But I think the conclusion we should draw, particularly in light of what the question was about the urgency, that we need to feel a sense of urgency, is it's time to begin building our own forces, and we can defeat them. And that actually, I think, addresses also the question of the write-in votes for Sanders. I'm open to that. That's definitely far better than voting for Hillary Clinton. But I think actually, if we want to build something, I think it actually would serve more of a purpose to vote for Jill Stein that actually begins building an alternative. Your vote would be counted, much more likely to be registered and show a protest, show opposition, and help build an alternative to the Democratic Party. The final thing is just on this issue that was just brought up about Trump and the Republicans. Brings me to one thing. I think the key thing for fighting Trump that's come out in the discussion is we need to build movements in the streets, which obviously Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, is not interested in doing. We need to appeal. Bernie Sanders running would actually challenge Trump and appeal to a section of supporters of saying, you want to fight against Wall Street, you want to fight against the establishment, I'm your candidate, not Hillary Clinton, not Donald Trump. But also, if I know Sanders shares a lot of the concerns the brother raised, that he said the main reason he doesn't want to run, it goes back to what you said before, is he wants to avoid helping Donald Trump. And one of the things that Shama and Socialist Alternatives raised, if that's Bernie Sanders' main concern, why doesn't he at least, and we could have a debate about this in our movement, why doesn't he at least stand in those so-called safe states, the states where it's clear that the Democrat or Republican candidate's going to win, and he could use that. We think we want to build a party all across this country, but at the very least, he could begin the process by standing in states like New York and California and Washington and Texas, and not stand in the states which are quite close. So, and the final thing is, if he doesn't run, at the very least, and I think I would appeal to everyone in this room and the other panelists to join us in this, we need to at least put pressure on Bernie to keep his movement together. There has to be an organization. And that comes back also to what Charles was saying. I would challenge with the internet age that you don't need organization, which I'm not sure is what you're saying, that Sanders can bring together supporters in a member organization that has democratic structures. And I think if it had those democratic structures, that people would vote for independent politics.
Yeah, and just, on the points Charles raised, I do lean towards an independent, or third party, but I'm not rigid about it. I could see places where you would primary Democrats. Just want to put that out there, that I think that a mix of it does make some sense to me. In terms of issues that have gotten raised as opposed to elections, that's right. We didn't really talk about issues like minimum wage. Like somebody over here asked about this, and one thing that I really enjoyed about the Sanders campaign was the way in which they at a certain point, I'm sure everybody got these, the email blasts, not donate money to me, not come to my rally, but like sign this petition by this other organization on X, Y, or Z. Or sometimes they incorporate it into their own website. So I think there was a smart way in which Sanders was bringing in issues as part of his campaign that already in addition to putting out legislation, which obviously as a senator he does, but that was interesting to me. And absolutely, I think unions, other organizations, it can't be all about elections. It has to be about ballot initiatives and about legislation as well, and about standing on issues. For me, obviously, it's things like the minimum wage and other labor issues are what I lean towards. On Hillary, the last poll I saw, it's 42-37 with Trump pulling ahead. So she may lose anyway, and as Philip said, why would you ever want a candidate? Trump's going to run to her left on trade, on a whole bunch of issues. Because Trump is appealing to a lot of. He put on a hard hat at a recent rally. I mean, this is an appeal to conservative union members in a lot of cases, but they're not fundamentally conservative. They're pissed off. And that's how you can exploit being economically angry into all kinds of xenophobia and race and other things that he pitches to people as an answer. So I think that Trump will run to Hillary's left on certain things. So anyway, but yeah, I just don't see her as the candidate you want. You want an anti-establishment. You want a populist to run against a populist if you want to win. And just a very, very last thing. In terms of unions and the environment, I mean, they stand as actually kind of a roadblock in many cases. Because it means transitioning the economy in terms of jobs. But there's the Blue-Green Alliance. There's a lot of talk. I mean, unions like the steel workers, they realize that a lot of their industries, because of economic changes, are dying off anyway. So just food for thought that unions are, the mine workers, I think, are, for example, difficult. But there are other unions that are actually thinking ahead on environment, like light rail. I think the Amalgamated Transit Union is very good on pushing light rail. It's a jobs program for them, is the inverse. But you just need to make sure there's retraining for people. You don't want people to get caught up in their lives here and now. Obviously, we face a existential threat, but you got to make provision for people's jobs right now too, with retraining and other things.
So we'll pass it back to Shama. We've got 2 minutes left, so we'll have Shama close us out.
Why do you have to close it up? There's no other session after this one. Why can't you just continue?
Yeah, the session starts in 10 minutes.
Right after this, isn't it?
Let's not have a Nevada situation here.
Well, I personally have to apologize. I have somewhere else to be in a few minutes. So, but I'm happy to continue the conversation, or others can continue. That's totally fine. Just a few quick points. One, just on the write-in, just very quickly, I agree with what Philip said. That it's much more powerful to have an effort to, vote for Jill Stein as using that as a basis to talk about an independent party for the 99%. I would also say, just to add to that if Bernie was to endorse Hillary in any way, it would make no sense for us to call for a write-in for Bernie Sanders, because, we have, at that moment, we should not be legitimizing Bernie Sanders in any way. We should be moving away from that. And so that would be very important. The other is about, and there was a question about Supreme Courts that were, I don't think you said it quite like this, but you didn't sort of conclude, but the conclusion of what you said was, we have to hunker down and support Hillary, because if Trump wins, then we have the specter of a conservative Supreme Court, and do we really want the progress like Roe v. Wade rolled back? And that's a fair question. We don't want reproductive rights to be rolled back, but let's also be clear that progress like Roe v. Wade, like marriage equality, that was won on the streets. The Supreme Court did not lead that fight. And as a matter of fact, Roe v. Wade was won at a time when the establishment was probably the really, really concerned. It was won in the Nixon era, when we did not have any establishment support. Our movements did not have any establishment support. It was fought on the streets. Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality recently, but that again followed the movement, lagged the movement by many, many miles. And so at the end of the day, I understand the concerns that people have about a conservative Supreme Court, but we have to understand that change does not happen one way or another because of the nature of a certain Supreme Court, nominees. What happens is the overall political atmosphere in the country, and right now there is a push for a real fight back against corporations, and that's what we need to do, not just prop up a corporate candidate again. And I think that ties into the question of climate change as well. Right now the barrier for fighting against climate change is not an understanding of climate change, it's the fact that big oil controls all the resources, and both these parties are tied to big oil. Look at the nerve that Hillary Clinton has had to defend fracking again and again in different ways, when everybody who's on the ground knows that fracking is absolutely terrible and going in the wrong direction. We are not going to get any movement against climate change, any progress against climate change by supporting the Democratic Party. And I would say that, yes, the ecological clock is ticking, and I don't know if we will be able to build our movements fast enough, but I can guarantee you this, we are going to paralyze our movements if we keep supporting the Democratic Party again and again. And the most important thing we can do is to fight for independent politics this year and in the coming years.
Thanks, everybody.